Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, on this fantastic Thursday for what is going to be nothing short of another jam-packed daily market update. We've got some bad news to share with you guys in regards to the SEC versus Ripple Brad and Chris case. Last night, the SEC actually officially appealed the case. We're going to be diving into this news. Now, whether you like XRP or Ripple or not is largely irrelevant. We want, as an industry, this case to go in our favour. And actually, I'm rather shocked that the SEC decided to appeal this case, given what's came out over the past couple of weeks, like the self-admission that cryptos are not securities in themselves. It's some of the exchange offerings around cryptos that make them securities. We're going to cover all of that. So we've got a little bit of bad news to get into. We're going to be looking at the market generally. We know what took place with, obviously, Iran and Israel. It's my opinion. And guys, get on board with the Patreon. Come and join a community. It makes sort of the volatility of the crypto space a lot easier to deal with. It's absolutely our opinion. And we did quite an interesting Patreon sort of ad hoc meeting last night where we really looked at the fact that markets aren't positioned for escalation of the Iran-Israel conflict. In fact, we've got a lot of short-term targets across the board. We're seeing amazing things in the altcoin sector. We will be doing a live stream potentially tomorrow where we'll cover this in a lot more detail. You know, we know the crypto space is in a little bit of downside, but we think it's short-term. We're going to take a zoomed-out look on everything once we've covered the bad news. Swift came out with something huge today in regards to actually moving towards digital assets in 2025. We'll look at that also. But let's start the video off on some good news. And this news is actually more relevant than just to us homeowners in the United Kingdom. So, Powell cuts 50 basis points. Lagarde basically tells the market to expect an October cut. Bailey, hold my something. This may be a dovish BOE moment. Now, Bailey recently came out today, and it's essentially caused the markets to expect a 50 basis point cut from Bailey, who has held rates. This has it's also very interesting that with this conflict that we're seeing the dollar gain some strength because it's an uncertainty trade. Now, we know the correlation, and we cover it day in, day out here on the channel between currency strength and markets. And we think we're on a currency weakening journey, and the predominant currency we want to see weaken is, of course, the Dixie. But the Dixie has been a little bit strong. It's been strong, obviously because of the conflicts and also because of the likes of this, and that's leaning on the space somewhat. But in the grand scheme of things, ladies and gents, I don't know why people are as panicked as they are. People always want the worst scenario. And I'm unsure why, but we're going to cover the markets in a lot more detail. So I want to start off on a little bit of good news before we get into the bad news. It's always good to have a little bit of good before bad. And it's not terrible news in regards to the XRP and the sort of Ripple case. But essentially, people are now expecting a 50 basis point rate cut. Rates are coming down in the UK. They're coming down across the board. Ultimately, you know, this should see assets and money creation increase and global liquidity increase. All the cycles that we look at play out. And this is why we've got technical targets across the board. The altcoin market looks primed, ladies and gents. Yes, it's having a bit of a pullback. We'll maybe talk about that in a little bit more detail in regards to we've given a lot of sort of falling wedge patterns, a lot of sort of cycle structure in regards to where we think the altcoin space is. But we shall talk about that in a little bit more detail. Of course, 2 days ago, we had pretty insane news that Bitwise today, we filed an initial registration statement on Form S1 for a new Bitwise ETP. We believe blockchains will usher in a new apolitical monetary assets and permissionless applications for the 21st century, said Bitwise's CEO, Hunter Horsley. We aim to help investors access the opportunities in the space and are excited to continue that work with our filing for a Bitwise XRP ETF or ETP. An ETF will follow in our opinion. However, there's been a little bit of a setback. So we had some great news 2 days ago, and then yesterday we had some pretty negative news in regards to the SEC actually now appealing the Ripple case, which seems a little bit not sensical. We're going to look at Brad's take on this and, of course, Stuart Aldultry, who's the Chief Legal Officer over at Ripple. In regards to the SEC also, this is some news that largely went unnoticed. Their Director of Enforcement essentially has stepped down. So Gurbir Grewal The Director of Enforcement of the SEC is stepping down and will be replaced by Sanjay Wadhwa. I'm definitely not saying that right, guys. I'm sure some of you are chuckling at my poor pronunciation there. There's been a real reshaking with the SEC, rather interestingly. But let's cover the sort of bad news, if you will. So, this is from Brad Garlinghouse. If Gensler and the SEC were rational, they would have moved on from this case long ago. It certainly hasn't protected investors and instead has damaged the credibility and reputation of the SEC. Somehow, they still haven't gotten the message. They lost on everything that matters. Ripple, the crypto industry, and the rule of law have already prevailed. While we'll fight in court for as long as we need, let's be clear, XRP status as a non-security is the law of the land. And that does not change even the face of this misguided and infuriating, you can feel Brad Garlinghouse's anger coming through the screen at you, can't you? Appeal. Remember, when the SEC tried unsuccessfully to file an interlocutory appeal, they made clear they had no intention of challenging XRP status as a non-security. So this seems like bad news on the surface. How bad is it? Well, I would say they're just going to go for a larger settlement figure. That's likely the result here. Not the reclassification of XRP is not up for grabs in my opinion. However, they've appealed it. It's annoying, but why wouldn't they? They're not the ones picking up the bill. You guys are. You guys are paying for all of this, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, in the name of protecting you when the SEC has done nothing of the sort. Government, what are we going to do? I don't know. I don't want to say too much. So this is from Stuart Aldultry, who's obviously the chief legal officer over at Ripple. The SEC's decision to appeal is disappointing, but not surprising. I don't think any of us are that surprised. This just prolongs what's already a complete embarrassment for the agency. The court already rejected the SEC suggesting that Ripple acted recklessly and there was no allegations of fraud. And, of course, there were no victims or losses. There was one guy that was literally claiming, because he bought XRP and the price went down, that he was a victim. I mean, this is somebody the government works for. Somebody that doesn't take any account of their own actions and just wants to sort of, be looked after. Some people do want to be looked after. Some people are happy with that. I'm just not sure the government is the kind of people that you want to encourage to look after you, because they ultimately have a broader agenda, I think. So, point number 2, instead of faithfully applying the law, this agency under this chair continues to engage in litigation warfare against the industry. We are evaluating whether to file a cross appeal. Interesting. Either way, the SEC's lawsuit has been irrational and misguided from the start, and we're ready to prove that yet again in this appellate court, once again taking the lead for the industry. Coincidence that the SEC Enforcement Director announced his resignation about an hour before this. So is there a crossover here? And this, of course, is from an individual here. Let's give him a shout out. Phil and Law. Let's give him a follow as well. Defense lawyer, former federal prosecutor. He's also pointing this out too. That essentially the SEC are appealing. It's nonsensical. I think they're just going for a larger figure. Again, and this is the core problem with governments, right? If the SEC had to think about taking Ripple and appealing this and the costs involved and have to know that they would have to pick them up themselves and it wasn't the UK taxpayers or the US taxpayers that were going to have to do that, they wouldn't do it. This is the problem with government. This is why there's such an inefficiency in government, because there's no incentivization for them to do a good job. And UK is, in many regards, far, far worse. So there's a real lack of incentivization for people to do a good job because their own capital isn't on the line. I would say I'm more of a capitalist than I am a socialist, for sure. I think there's some flaws in capitalism as well. But what we have is not capitalism in the UK, US, or around the world broadly. It's more of a communism that is disguised as capitalism. Certainly in the UK, I mean, it's just unbelievable what's taking place at the moment. It's sad, to be honest with you, and so much so that we're actually going to be looking to move the UK, or leave the UK. I've always also said this. It'd be a great business idea, and if somebody wants to jump into bed with me, so to speak, on this in regards to actually facilitating in a legally compliant way people to be actually able to do that and show them what's available there. That would be a great business idea. I'm sure some of you guys have already thought about that. Let's talk about a little bit of good news. So nonsensical that, it is what it is. Let's talk about the cryptocurrency space in just a second, more broadly. Swift, which has, I think, 11,000 banks under them. Exciting news. Starting next year, financial institutions from around the world will start trailing live digital assets and currency transactions on the Swift network. This makes an important milestone in our journey to enable banks to transact interchangeably across both existing and emerging assets and currency types using their current connections to Swift. As new forms of value emerge, very interesting. Remember, Swift is the standard, really, in regards to the monetary system. Our intention is to continue to offer our community the ability to seamlessly make and track transactions of all kinds of assets using the same secure and resilient infrastructure that is integrated to their operations today. So this is huge. Live trials of digital assets transactions on Swift to start in 2025. Big news. The world is moving towards blockchain. There's so many reasons why we're bullish on the space. We'll talk about we talk a lot about technically and macroeconomically why we're bullish and positioned in the manner that we are. But fundamentally, there's an entire technological revolution that's going on here. People don't realize that in the world that we're moving towards, and it's not going to take long, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, you're going to be using blockchain without even knowing that you're using it. Just like when the engine came about and cars came about, nobody thinks about how that works. They just use it. They get in the car and drive to work. Or we jump on the internet and we communicate with one another. We use computers. We don't think about when we're on an Apple, the technology that's behind it. And this is what blockchain is going to do. It's going to fundamentally change many areas. Let's talk about the price to sort of wrap things up because it's been a bit of a longer one. So much doom and gloom out there. Why? Look at the chart. You're only propagating doom and gloom if you're not looking at what is factual in regards to a chart. You can't make this stuff up. There's no room for opinions here. Look at the chart. Look at where we've come from and look at where we currently are and look at what's currently happening. There was lots of smaller targets, certainly for the likes of Bitcoin, that give us every reason to believe we've got a small target taking us to 84k, which, by the way, hasn't been invalidated at all. We've got those larger targets. Remember, you're in a sort of descending, broadening wedge. You're just coming back to the midpoint here. So you broke it. You're now probably going to find it a support and bounce off it. And the sort of fear that we see is just like, I feel sorry for a lot of retail. There's a lot of technical confidence in regards to the direction we think Bitcoin's going. I think right now you're also suffering from a little bit of dollar strength, but the dollar's still in that broader downward trajectory. This is a real erectile projectile. That is a very strong candle for the dollar, I have to admit. I think this has a number of things baked into it. The Iran-Israel conflict, and of course, what's happening with other central banks. GBP, USD, we've still got targets to the upside for. But this is an ugly pullback, but still in what we think is a broader uptrend. And we think all this is going to take place. You're going to have pushback. You're going to have counter-trend moves. But the broader trend, I think, is very apparent when we look at things like the total cryptocurrency market, excluding Bitcoin and Ethereum. I'm not worried in the slightest, guys. We still think there's a broader direction ahead of us. We think this is going to result for the total cryptocurrency market cap in a major bull flag that's going to see the market double in terms of size. We think that's coming in the next sort of 6 to 12 months. And then some. So do not fear. Allincrypto is here. When you take a look at the markets objectively, something like AVAX, certainly from our market mastery course, those of you that have taken it, and well done, guys. We've been looking at a lot of your results. Fantastic. Really happy that. And what you'll do when you take that quiz is you'll be able to prove to yourself that you can actually, with a degree of accuracy, guess what's coming next for the markets based on how they're technically, or where they technically are in regards to the 4 phases that we look at. Get ready, guys. Do not fear. Allincrypto is here. We've got an amazing time ahead of us. A little bit of negative news today, but it broadly doesn't change anything in our opinion. I'm going to love and leave you on that note, guys. Thanks a lot for watching. See you all in the next one.